For over a century, a mystery has loomed over Michigan's soil, one that could rewrite the history of North America. Thousands of bizarre artifacts, etched with symbols no one expected to find in the Midwest, began surfacing in the late 19th century. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Greek letters, cuneiform writing, and even some depictions of what appeared to be biblical scenes. Were these relics evidence of an ancient civilization lost to time, one that somehow made its way to the Great Lakes centuries before Columbus? Or were they the greatest archaeological hoax in American history? The debate has raged on for decades, with experts, skeptics, and believers battling over the truth. But as science advances, new methods could finally settle the question once and for all. Are the Michigan relics real, or is this just another elaborate deception that fooled the world? The first of these artifacts surfaced in 1890, when a man named James Scotford uncovered what he claimed was an ancient clay cup while digging post holes in Montcalm County, Michigan. The discovery ignited excitement, and soon more people joined in the search. What followed was a flood of artifacts unearthed from 17 counties across Michigan over a span of more than 30 years. The relics ranged from engraved slate tablets to copper objects and clay figurines, all carrying mysterious symbols. At first, local residents were eager to believe in the authenticity of these finds, but suspicions quickly arose. Many of the so-called discoveries seemed too convenient, as the artifacts were planted rather than naturally buried. Still, the excitement around them refused to die down. As more artifacts emerged, a few names became central to the controversy. James Scotford, the original discoverer, continued to find relics with surprising frequency. Then came Daniel E. Soper, a former Michigan Secretary of State with a reputation for being less than honest. After leaving office due to allegations of corruption, Soper attached himself to the Michigan Relics, becoming their biggest promoter. His enthusiasm turned into a full-fledged operation, unearthing, collecting, and selling these artifacts. By 1906, Scotford had moved to Detroit, and conveniently, relics started appearing there as well. This raised even more eyebrows. The objects being found also changed over time, shifting from mostly clay artifacts to slate and copper tablets, as if someone had altered their production methods. Soper and Scotford weren't just amateur enthusiasts, they were salesmen. Their goal was to get institutions like the Smithsonian to purchase these relics. But before they could secure any major deals, a group of scholars was called to examine the artifacts. A professor from Lake Forest College in Illinois was one of the first experts to analyze the relics. His verdict was swift. They were fakes, not just forgeries, but poorly made ones. He pointed out inconsistencies in the writing styles and the crude craftsmanship. If the relics were truly ancient, their inscriptions should have matched known historical languages. But instead, they seemed to be a confusing mix of different scripts. Despite this, Soper and Scotford didn't stop. They continued discovering artifacts and drawing interest from religious figures. One of the biggest believers in the relics was Father James Savage, a Catholic priest from Detroit. Unlike scholars, he saw the artifacts as potential proof of an ancient Judeo-Christian presence in Michigan. He speculated that they could be linked to the lost tribes of Israel, an idea that fascinated him so much that he began buying every artifact he could find. Father Savage wasn't the only one intrigued by the relics. The artifacts also caught the attention of the Church of Latter-day Saints. The Mormon faith includes stories of ancient civilizations in the Americas, and the discovery of tablets inscribed with strange languages sparked interest among some members of the church. A particular feature of the relics, the use of metal plates with inscriptions, seemed eerily similar to the way the Book of Mormon was originally recorded. This paralleled the story of Joseph Smith, who had claimed to receive divine golden plates inscribed with a sacred language. So, when the Michigan relics included engraved copper plates, they excited some Mormons who saw them as evidence supporting their beliefs. One Mormon leader, Bishop Rudolf Etzenhauser, was particularly fascinated. He believed that the relics had the potential to rewrite history, proving that ancient civilizations with links to the Old World had settled in America long before European explorers arrived. Hoping that someone would decipher the writings, he published a pamphlet showcasing photographs of the artifacts and calling for scholars to help interpret them. But the mystery remained. What was the writing on the relics actually saying? Unlike most confirmed archaeological discoveries, where inscriptions match known ancient languages, the symbols on the Michigan relics didn't fit into any recognized linguistic system. Some inscriptions looked like Christian symbols, while others mimicked Egyptian hieroglyphics, and still others seemed to contain Greek and Hebrew letters. But the combinations made no sense together. The script appeared randomly arranged, rather than forming coherent sentences. It was as if someone had combined bits and pieces of different ancient languages without actually understanding them. One consistent marking found on most of the relics became known as the mystic symbol, a series of scratches that scholars couldn't identify. Some believers thought it might be an ancient religious marking, while skeptics saw it as a telltale sign of forgery. As doubts grew, an investigation by a Detroit newspaper journalist, William A. Ben Scudder, exposed even more suspicious details. Scudder discovered that Scotford's sons and his son-in-law were involved in producing the artifacts. They were literally manufacturing relics in what they jokingly called Detroit's Ancient Relic Factory. A local woman who lived near the Scotford family even reported hearing constant hammering sounds, the supposed relics being made in real time. When confronted, one of Scotford's associates made a revealing comment asking, "What are you doing interfering with private enterprise?" essentially admitting that this was a business operation, not an archaeological discovery. By the early 20th century, experts had seen enough. In 1911, a team of scholars from various universities published a report in the American Antiquarian Journal, completely dismissing the relics as fraudulent. That same year, Professor Frederick Starr from the University of Chicago declared in a front-page Detroit News article that the relics were undeniable fakes. His reasoning? The inscriptions were inconsistent, the material was too well preserved for its supposed age, and the entire discovery process was too convenient. Despite this, Soper and Scotford continued digging and selling relics for nearly another decade. The operation didn't fully stop until 1920, when Soper retired and moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Even there, he continued promoting his artifacts under the name Colonel Soper, enjoying the attention he had built over the years. In total, between 3,000 and 9,000 Michigan relics were discovered between 1890 and 1920, making this one of the most persistent hoaxes in American archaeological history. Years passed, but the Michigan relics refused to fade into obscurity. Despite being labeled as frauds by experts, some researchers continued to investigate, believing that there was more to the story. One of the most dedicated voices in the debate was David Allen Deal, a self-taught scholar with a background in Paleo-Hebrew. Unlike previous researchers, Deal took a fresh approach, analyzing the symbols and languages found on the relics. His work led him to three major conclusions. He deciphered a language, identified a theology, and established a date for their creation. Deal's study revealed something surprising. Many of the symbols on the relics had biblical themes, with some scenes resembling stories from the Old Testament. One of the most notable inscriptions appeared to depict the Great Flood, using a visual representation of 40 days and 40 nights of rain. This was a major breakthrough, but the biggest revelation came when he examined the mystic symbol, a marking found on many of the relics. While earlier researchers had dismissed the symbol as random scratches, Deal claimed it was actually a stylized version of YHWH, the Hebrew name for God, pronounced Yahweh. This meant that, if genuine, the relics could be evidence of an ancient Hebrew-speaking group in North America. But there was a problem. The symbols weren't pure Hebrew. They seemed to be written in Paleo-Hebrew, but with a twist. Deal noted that the letters were disguised to look like cuneiform, an ancient script used by civilizations like the Sumerians and Babylonians. This raised an important question. If the relics were real, who created them? According to Deal, the Copts, an early Egyptian Christian sect, may have been responsible. He pointed to their unique theological beliefs, which included a central deity with two opposing sons, one good, one evil. This theology was not part of mainstream Christianity, which made its presence on the Michigan relics even more mysterious. How could a 19th century forger like James Scotford have known about these obscure religious ideas? Another key detail caught Deal's attention. A French translation of a rare Coptic text called the Pistis Sophia had been published in 1895, just 3 years after Scotford's first discovery. This text outlined similar theological concepts to those depicted on the relics. If Scotford had been faking the relics, could he have somehow gained access to this obscure religious text and used it as inspiration? Or was it just a coincidence? But perhaps the most fascinating part of Deal's research came when he analyzed a specific slate tablet found in Michigan. The tablet contained an astronomical event, what appeared to be a solar eclipse with a meteorite streaking across the sky. Using modern software, Deal tested his theory. He calculated eclipse events that matched the drawing on the tablet and found one that occurred on July 27, 352 AD over Michigan. Even more astonishing, this date lined up with the peak of the Delta Aquarid meteor shower, which happens every year at the end of July. Could a 19th century forger have accurately depicted an eclipse that occurred over 1,500 years ago? If not, did this prove the relics were real? This was one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in favor of the relic's authenticity. With the renewed interest sparked by researchers like Henriette Mertz and David Deal, Brigham Young University, which had inherited a large portion of the relics, faced increasing pressure to investigate further. Some accused the university of hiding the artifacts, fearing that their examination might challenge mainstream historical narratives. To address these concerns, BYU invited Dr. Richard Stamps, an archaeologist from Michigan, to conduct a full analysis of the relics. Stamps approached the relics with an open mind, carefully examining each artifact. He looked for tool marks, material consistency, and historical accuracy. His findings were damning. He discovered that many of the slate pieces showed evidence of being cut with modern saws. In some cases, the slate had been recycled from construction materials like windowsills and door frames. Even the clay artifacts raised red flags. Some bore imprints from wooden tables cut with industrial saws, proving that they were not ancient. The biggest blow to the relic's authenticity came when Stamps analyzed the copper artifacts. The thickness of the metal matched standard commercial-grade copper sheets from the late 1800s. He also found file marks on the copper, indicating that they had been shaped using modern tools. Native Americans who had worked with copper for thousands of years would have used stone hammers, which leave very different tool marks. The evidence was undeniable. The relics were not prehistoric, but the final confirmation came through thermoluminescence testing, a technique used to determine the age of ceramic artifacts. Dr. Carl Lippo from the University of Southern California tested a clay tablet from the collection. His results showed that the artifact was created in the late 1890s, precisely when Scotford and Soper had been actively discovering relics. At this point, the case should have been closed. The relics were fraudulent, and the evidence overwhelmingly proved it, but some still weren't convinced. One argument made by believers was that the Soper Savage collection, which had been thoroughly debunked, wasn't the only source of the Michigan relics. Some claimed that other relics had been discovered before Scotford as early as 1856. If this was true, it could suggest that Scotford had merely copied authentic artifacts rather than inventing the whole thing from scratch. However, there was no solid documentation to support these claims. Others pointed to linguistic similarities between the Michigan relics and other ancient scripts, arguing that the writing couldn't have been entirely fabricated. But skeptics argued that if a hoaxer had access to even a handful of real ancient inscriptions, they could have initiated the symbols without fully understanding their meaning. Despite the overwhelming evidence against the relics, some researchers believed that buried within the fakes, there could still be something real. Could there have been an actual ancient presence in Michigan, later overshadowed by Scotford's forgeries? If so, separating authentic artifacts from thousands of fakes would be nearly impossible. The Michigan Relics hoax remains one of the most persistent and elaborate frauds in North American archaeology. Yet the sheer number of artifacts, possibly as many as 9,000, and the complexity of their designs continue to fascinate historians and researchers alike. Was it all an elaborate scam? Or is there still an undiscovered truth hidden among the fakes? Let us know what you think in the comments. Oh, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a historical deep dive. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.